The story begins in a cool city that suddenly gets attacked by a terrifying creature known as a kaiju. Emergency alarms blast throughout the streets, warning everyone to run to safety. This kaiju is absolutely gigantic and smashes everything in its way because it rampages through town. The defense force quickly arrives on the scene and opens fire at the monster. They are used to battling these fearsome beasts. Onlookers wait in anticipation to see which powerful division will show up to take down the kaiju this time. To their excitement, it's the renowned 3rd Division. A brave young woman from the division steps forward wielding an enormous cannon. With incredible skill and strength, she blasts a massive hole right through the kaiju, slaying it in one epic shot. The cheering crowd is in awe of her heroic feat. Kafka, the main character of this tale, stares at the fallen monster's remains scattered all over, amazed by its colossal size. He informs his cleanup crew that they'll be putting in some serious overtime to deal with this mess. As the 3rd Division heroes walk away victorious to more applause, Kafka and his team get to their unglamorous but necessary work. However, they know that this is what they signed up for. It's their job, a tough one, to take apart Kaiju's corpse and dispose of it. A dirty and unappreciated task. The gravity of their work becomes crystal clear when Kafka notices a team member messing with something they shouldn't. It causes an explosion and injures someone. Luckily, Kafka has experience dealing with these situations, so he quickly jumps into action. With one dangerous kaiju comes a huge, disgusting mess to clean up. Kafka can't believe their bosses expect them to handle this enormous job in only a week. As if that wasn't stressful enough, Kafka then gets dispatched to a different understaffed area, the monster's intestines, much to his shock and dismay. His coworkers gossip about how nasty the intestines are as Kafka gets dragged away to his new assignment. When he arrives, the sight and smell instantly make him want to hurl, but as a dedicated employee, Kafka pushes through the stomach-churning work, because he knows it has to be done. Later that evening, an exhausted Kafka who is feeling pretty worn out returns home and tries to scrub away the awful stench from his job. A news report about the elite fighter Mina from the 3rd Division catches his attention. Amazingly, this young woman is only 27, but she has already slain hundreds of kaiju. It turns out Kafka and Mina used to be childhood friends who made a pact to defeat the monsters together when they grew up. A flashback shows a passionately determined young Mina vowing to fight the beasts that took her beloved cat. At work the next morning, a part-time student named Ikikawa joins Kafka's cleanup crew. The ambitious youngster boldly announces his dream of becoming a defense force hero. Kafka's coworker points out that he once had the same lofty goals, but ultimately gave up on them. Ikikawa demands to know how Kafka could abandon such an amazing dream. Put on the spot, Kafka shares that he reached a point where he had to acknowledge his own limits compared to more talented people. He insists he gave it his all. The idealistic Ikikawa passionately declares he will never quit no matter what. He simply can't comprehend Kafka's perspective at all and storms off. This leaves Kafka frustrated, knowing he can't explain himself without seeming like a total loser. The pointed questions force Kafka to reflect uncomfortably on his life choices. The cleanup crew gets to work on the kaiju corpse, taking samples and determining which parts to incinerate, much to Kafka's simultaneous amusement and horror. His boss assigns the awful intestines job to both him and Ikikawa again. At least Kafka knows he's considered a pro at it. However, he can't shake the feeling that he made the wrong choices. When lunchtime finally rolls around, Kafka notices Ikikawa hasn't brought much food. The tough guy newbie acts like he doesn't need to eat. However, Kafka, as a seasoned veteran, hands him a vitamin drink and insists he stay nourished if he wants to survive the grueling work. He even offers Ikikawa some nose plugs for the unbearable stench. Although the proud kid declines at first, as the long, disgusting day finally ends, Ikikawa shocks Kafka by thanking him for his help and revealing the defense force raised their age limit to 33. He says it's not his business, but he can tell Kafka seems depressed about his own lost dream. Ikikawa still thinks Kafka has time to pursue it if he wants. Kafka appreciates the unexpected words of support. Just then, a terrifying creature suddenly appears out of nowhere and attacks. With lightning-fast reflexes, Kafka grabs Ikikawa and dodges the monster's deadly strike. He yells at the rookie to run and get back up, but brave Ikikawa refuses to leave Kafka behind to certain death. Kafka gives him another forceful order to flee if he ever hopes to live out his defense force dream. Finally, Ikikawa listens reluctantly and escapes, while Kafka stays back to face the abomination alone. The hideous beast pursues Kafka through the crumbling urban streets. He narrowly evades its vicious lunges and bites. By ducking into a thin alleyway, Kafka briefly gives the creature the slip. He catches his breath and reflects on his fateful childhood promise, with Mina bonding over their shared pain of loss and vowing to slay Kaiju together when they grew up. Snapping back to the dire present, Kafka laments that this can't be how his story ends because he runs with all his might. The relentless monster demolishes entire buildings around him. In a final act of brave defiance, Kafka faces the creature head-on, although it seems like a futile last stand. The beast viciously pummels Kafka, crushing his leg and preparing to devour him whole. But just when all hope seems lost, Ikikawa suddenly reappears. The kid came back to save the man who saved him. He called for help, and now backup is on the way. With Ikikawa now also in mortal danger from the monster, Kafka agonizes over his failures and inability to save anyone from cats to rookies. As the creature readies a fatal blow on Ikikawa, Kafka wails in anguish. However, the beast abruptly explodes into gory pieces. To Kafka's shock, his childhood friend Mina arrives with her elite squad and effortlessly obliterates the threat with her cannon. She dispatches her team to aid any survivors while she secures the perimeter. Kafka marvels at her incredible power, realizing she's achieved a level of greatness he can never reach, because this is something he could only dream of. Although he feels proud of her, he can't help but feel left behind. Later at the hospital, Kafka finds himself sharing a room with an awestruck Ikikawa, who credits Kafka for saving his life with those orders to retreat. Kafka has an epiphany reflecting on his old vow with Mina. Even if he loses their imagined rivalry, maybe he doesn't have to give up completely. Working up his nerve, Kafka decides to try again to achieve his dream of joining the defense force no matter what. However, before he can process this revelation, Kafka gets another shock. A hideous creature is hovering over him. To his horror, the fiendish thing dives into his mouth and says it has found him at last. As Kafka convulses and gags, a disturbed Ikikawa checks on him, only to discover a real monster in his hospital bed. The two stare at each other and then slowly turn to look in dawning horror at Kafka's new mutated reflection. Realizing what this development could mean, Kafka tries to calm Ikikawa and explain it's still him. But then, another witness enters the room, sees the creature, and calls the defense force in a panic. Now, Kafka and Ikikawa are the ones freaking out, knowing exactly what the soldiers do to monsters. Ikikawa tells Kafka he better run before they arrive. This is urgent. Flashing back again, we see a younger Kafka training Mina on fighting Kaiju because it's important by attacking their legs and tying them up. Mina admits she's frightened to actually face the beasts. However, Kafka promises he'll always be right there by her side when the time comes. But now, in the present, Mina bitterly remembers his broken vow. She receives word of a Kaiju sighting at the hospital and swears to destroy it personally. Mina briefs her team on their mission to eliminate the threat without civilian casualties, although that sounds difficult. Meanwhile, Kafka and Ikikawa go for a desperate Hail Mary to convince the informant man that Kafka only looks like a monster. He's not actually any danger, but appearances can be deceiving. Their efforts plunge into chaos when Kafka accidentally terrifies the old man into cardiac arrest. The ill-meaning witness perishes on the spot. As the entire hospital catches wind of the commotion, Ikikawa urges Kafka to book it before the defense force arrives seeking to kill him on sight. After Kafka 1 makes their escape route by accidentally smashing open the wall, the odd pair plunge through and flee into city streets. The soldiers promptly get word that the Kaiju has left the building and is heading downtown. They move out to intercept it by any means necessary. Racing through the city, a panting Ikikawa questions when and how Kafka suddenly turned into a creature. He swears that Kafka was still normal earlier that very same day. He wonders aloud if his friend is even still the same person deep down. However, Kafka has no idea himself. Not only is his physical form monstrously twisted, but his body seems to move against his own will now, too. Although another mortifying problem is brewing, Kafka really needs to pee, but no longer seems to possess the relevant anatomy to do so. Ikikawa tells him to just hold it, but this is easier said than done. Increasingly less confident that his body will obey him, Kafka insists he can't wait and will have to go on the street. However, to their mutual horror, the unthinkable happens. The story takes an even stranger turn, as poor Kafka and Ikikawa now must navigate this most awkward and alarming development together. Kafka fell to the ground, his face burning with embarrassment. He wished he could erase that mortifying moment from his mind forever. But Ikikawa snapped him back to reality, reminding him they needed to keep moving before the defense force arrived on the scene. This sparked a worrying question in Kafka's mind. Could he still pursue his dream of joining the defense force while trapped in this monstrous body? Although the grim truth was that it would be impossible, The soldiers were trained to mercilessly destroy creatures like him on sight. Just as Kafka had finally mustered the determination to chase his goals again, his physical transformation had forever locked him out of that path. Ikikawa struggled to find comforting words. The best he could offer was a temporary hideout for Kafka to lay low in. However, before they could make their escape, Kafka's eyes widened at something approaching behind them. Ikikawa asked if it was the defense force, but the threat was far worse: an actual kaiju. Word of this second monster attack quickly reached the soldiers, forcing them to divide their forces to handle both crises. Back in the embattled city, Kafka somehow sensed that this new creature was the same type that had previously terrorized him and Ikikawa. Although the student realized they could use this development to their advantage, the appearance of another target would split the defense force's attention. This would allow them to flee more easily. However, amid the chaos, a young girl was trapped in a nightmare. Her family had failed to evacuate in time, and now her mother was pinned beneath a fallen dresser. The woman shouted for her daughter to run to safety before the kaiju claimed her life as well. But the brave child refused to abandon her injured parent. Tragically, the girl's courageous stand only earned her a front row seat to further horrors. The kaiju smashed into the room, its gaping maw ready to devour her. But just as all hope seemed lost, Kafka burst in and delivered a devastating elbow strike to the monster's head. The blow sent the kaiju flying through the air, crashing down several city blocks away. Kafka marveled at his newfound strength, shocked by the raw power in his transformed body. Snapping back to the dire situation, he turned to check on the terrified girl. She recoiled in fear at the sight of another monster looming over her. Kafka's attempts at a friendly smile probably didn't help because his visage was still unsettling and alien. However, once Ikikawa entered the scene, the child seemed to understand that these strange beings were here to rescue her. The pair finally freed the girl's unconscious mother from the debris, and she would be all right once they got her to safety. But the kaiju chose that moment to come storming back for a rematch. Kafka ordered Ikikawa to quickly evacuate with the girl and her mother while he stayed behind to unleash his full might upon the creature.